In my years of ministry, I've served churches of all sizes in several parts of Virginia. I've heard that there are 4 Virginias, and I've served in all 4 of them, all 4 areas of our Commonwealth. I have served growing churches. I have served churches in steep decline. I have served in a rural setting, a small town, a small city, an area that might be called multicultural suburban, and now living here in Great Bridge. In moving from place to place, I'm accustomed to my district superintendent describe the church I'm going to. I mean, that's what they do. They describe the church, but not just the church. They also describe some of the demographics around the church. So it's not just the church I'm hearing about, but I'm also getting a little bit about the community in which the church dwells. It will be the chief area of ministry. But not only have I heard from district superintendents, I've also heard from well-meaning parishioners who were in the church I was currently serving. When they hear I'm getting ready to move to a different part of the Commonwealth, they are offering to me words of wisdom. Maybe not words of wisdom, more like words of warning. When I was in Smithfield, a town not too far from here, I had a parishioner express concern when they found out I was moving to Lynchburg. And that I would be living not just near Lynchburg, but in Bedford County, which was actually one of the most conservative counties in all of Virginia. And the conversation started like this. You do realize you're moving to a very conservative part of the state, and the county in which you live is one of the most conservative in all of Virginia. And, he wasn't wrong, but he made it sound like I was crazy to wanting to move there. And I needed to remind him I was being sent by the bishop to serve where she had appointed. Was there in Lynchburg and loved being there in Lynchburg, but several years later I am again appointed, this time by a different district superintendent, to Northern Virginia. And as you may guess, I had some well-intentioned members, and actually a member of the staff in Lynchburg say, you do realize that you're moving into one of the most progressive areas of the state. Fairfax has been blue for some time now. How are you going to handle that? And I once again need to remind this person and those people in that church that, well, I'm sent by the bishop, and I have no choice in the matter. I kind of said no at first, but that didn't last but so long. When I was appointed here last year, I once again heard from people up there. You do realize where you're going. You do realize that where you're going, are you going to be comfortable there? It's a rather red area. And 2 weeks ago, I was at a Clergy Day part event, and a friend of mine who has served like me different areas of the state, moves around kind of like I have, say to me in passing, so how's it down there in the bastion of conservatism? I'm amazed at the assumptions we often have about particular areas of the state and for the country, for that matter. Now, we are accustomed, maybe we've been conditioned to see the map go what? All red or all blue, as if it means it's all red or all blue. At minimum, what does it mean? One more person voted to make it red or blue. Here in Virginia, I guess it means we're no longer considered a swing state, as both parties are not spending nearly as much as they are in the state like Pennsylvania, where I had the pleasure of experiencing the onslaught of both parties offering maximum effort as I spent just one night in that state. I love that state, but ready to go somewhere else and not be inundated with all the ads. Assumptions are made, and there are generalizations. But with each move, I had people from both sides, if you will, from both parties, if you will, voice concern about where I was going to live. Maybe they were concerned about my well-being, and they were naming the importance of place. And each time as I went from place to place, they were wondering, are you going to be a good fit? Are you going to be a good match? Not because of your theology or because of the mission of the church. Are you going to fit in with the prevailing political leanings in any given area. Journalist Bill Bishop writes that America is in the middle of what can be described as the big sort. What this means is that Americans are moving to locations or increasingly living in locations where they're surrounded by people who share their same beliefs. Curtis James and Nancy Frentz in their book, The After Party, write that as a result, we have forgotten how to disagree with our neighbors because we no longer live with people with whom we disagree. Millions of Americans are now less likely to live near people they disagree with than at any other time in recent memory or since researchers have been tracking the statistics. Now, I realize in the places I have served, I've never once served a church that was filled with all Republicans. And I've never served a church that was filled with all Democrats, nor have I lived in a neighborhood that could say the same. However, I've experienced the different patterns, and there are reasons for these generalizations. There's reasons that people can write about the big shift. People tend to choose to live in certain places of the country or a geographical area based on certain demographics. In addition to the educational systems and the healthcare options, beliefs and politics factor in where someone might choose to live. And people often choose churches, not just where they align theologically or missionally, but politically. See, in some ways, that kind of alignment, it's just easier. It's just easier. It's easy to surround ourselves with people who share the same values and political ideologies. Yes, I said it was easier, but it didn't say it was necessarily better. I have wanted to tell the powers that be, just send me to a conservative church, or just send me to a progressive church so I can at least sleep better, and not have to worry about how decisions over even minor matters will impact the church. But I've never made that one of my requirements as I've gone from place to place. Now, friends, you can find a more conservative church in this town, no doubt. And you can also find a more progressive church in this town or in the surrounding areas. No doubt about that either. And it may be simpler, but just as there is a place in God's kingdom for churches on either side of the theological spectrum, there is the need for the United Methodist Church that places a stress on everyone being welcomed at table. And that no one is excluded and no one is made to feel what? Less than, inferior, too old school, or too wishy-washy new age based upon one's political views or leanings. When we seek uniformity, one of the downsides is that we're not as challenged to grow or listen to a different view or ever question assumptions that we inherited. Though it can be frustrating at times, and being a centrist, and I have the ability as a centrist to tick everybody off equally. Yes, it can be very frustrating at times being a centrist and being in a church where there isn't uniformity, but I have found hope being in a church that is in the tradition of John Wesley, who said these words. But although a difference in opinions or modes of worship may prevent an entire external union, yet need it prevent our union in affection? Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike? May we not be of one heart, though we may not be of one opinion? Without all doubt, we may, herein all the children of God may unite, notwithstanding these smaller differences. These remaining as they are, they may forward one another in love and good works. Liliana Mason, author of Uncivil Agreement, How Politics Became Our Identity. And yes, it has become our identity, unfortunately. How Politics Has Become Our Identity makes the following claim based on research that homogeneity will make your personal relationships easier, but more vulnerable to political extremism. She writes, a lack of exposure to other ideas and people can make other ideas seem extreme and other people seem totally foreign even when they're not. And this includes both intolerance of the policy positions on the other side and, more basically, an intolerance of the increasing strangeness of the outsiders. Now catch this. It can make a relatively moderate person intolerant of other views. Now, before I get to the good news, and that's why we're here. I mean, we want to hear the good news of Jesus Christ in any sermon that's ever offered. And I hope we get there. Trust we get there. But let me continue to offering and speak to a little bit about the extremism we're seeing even among people who would view themselves as moderate. In a study published by the University of Chicago's Project on Security and Threats as of June 2023, an estimated 44 million people supported using violence to coerce lawmakers. Let that sink in. We're not talking Venezuela years ago. We're not talking Russia. 44 million people in our country. Democrats had the largest increase. In January, 7% of Democrats supported using political violence against lawmakers. By June, this had climbed to 16%. 18% of all Republicans respondents endorsed this use of force against lawmakers. In 2021, 81% of local officials reported being on the receiving end of harassments, threats, and violence. I have a son who works in the political arena. He was doing a town hall one time where he had items thrown at him. And this was over a stadium. Some 50% of Democrats and 16% of Republicans believe America would be better off if large numbers of their opposition died. More than 42% of Americans view people in the opposing political party as downright evil. How are we going to get anything done if we view the other as evil? And the problem is not among the candidates who run for office at all different levels of government. It's easy to point the finger and to dehumanize them. We've been bombarded with not only dehumanizing candidates or reducing them to evil, but even those who support them have been easy targets as well. When I read these sad statistics over the current state of American politics, I know the way to solve this is not by casting my vote and remaining quiet, and then in 4 years quietly do the same. But we need to do our part to raise the awareness, to sound the alarm, to say there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better way for Christians to engage in the political process. And so instead of resigning or giving in to these trends, to the growing divide that comes with a big sword, we have to hold on to hope for a better tomorrow. And this hope is not resting in whether our candidate will win. The hope that we have as Christians have to offer in such a time as this is founded upon Jesus, who came to teach a different way, a way of hope and not fear, a way of serving rather than being served, a way of forgiveness, not revenge, a way of peace and reconciliation and not a way of disruption and war, a way of valuing another person instead of dehumanizing the other. We are called and challenged in the Scriptures to embrace a posture of humility where we walk with each other amid our political differences and have the ability to listen to one another and together do what? Seek justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly together with our God. You know, the person who votes differently than you or openly supports a candidate you don't support is what? Your fellow American. And in the life of the church and the community of faith, that person, your brother or sister, is a friend in Christ. So can we talk politics? Should we talk politics? Can we talk politics in the life of a church? We need to talk politics in the church, but in such a way that we as a community of faith, or me as a pastor, preaching on this matter is not aligning with a political party or a candidate. I'm sorry to disappoint you today. I'm not doing that. Any special interest group or pastor that states to be a Christian, you have to vote Democrat, or to be a Christian, you have to align with the Republican Party, is stating what? An opinion or an interest, and it's not a fact. It's not among the teachings of Jesus or the church. For we cannot box Jesus in and limit Jesus to one party over another. As Andy Stanley writes, and not in it to win it, leveraging Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, or the ecclesia of Jesus for a purpose other than the mission of Jesus is just another way to gain the whole world and to lose our souls and our influence. And one of the reasons young people are leaving the church or finding the church irrelevant is when the church discusses politics and backs politicians in such a way that you are either with Jesus or you're without Jesus based upon how you vote and what party you have aligned. And we can say all are welcomed. And that message is hard to overcome the onslaught of the agendas that say otherwise. So let's look to Jesus. And let's see what he did. So what did he do? Jesus called the disciples. We know their stories. The call stories are all there. He called fishermen for sure. We know about those dropping their nets. But he also called this guy named Matthew. And what was Matthew? Tax collector. And not only did he call Matthew a tax collector, he called this guy named Simon, who was known as a zealot. A zealot and a tax collector, with all the fishermen, were invited to be disciples and to do what? To sit at the very feet of Jesus, to dine with Jesus, to learn from Jesus. They were found in the same room, this tax collector and zealot, at the feet of Jesus, learning to be a disciple and to be leaders in this movement that Jesus was starting in such a way that people were all about loving God and loving their neighbors. Matthew and Simon would have different ideologies, different politics, different views of government. And if their ideologies dictated their thinking and their actions, they would have always what? Been at odds with each other. But both were called to do what? To love God and love neighbor. They were called to be disciples of Jesus Christ. They were called to learn from him, to pray with him, to break bread together with Jesus. And both heard the call to wash each other's feet. Tax collector and a zealot, with all the other fishermen, now disciples, called to wash each other's feet. Jesus had called them to a place to love God and love neighbor first. And just like all the other disciples needed to live out this radical teaching of Jesus, they too needed to do what? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with their God. You know, given the political climate we're in, I guess it would be easier to remain quiet and just cast our votes, fulfill our civic duty, and you know, just play nice, church. Play nice and accept the way things have been and just manage the best that we can. But if Jesus could work with and transform the mindsets of people like Matthew, a tax collector, and Simon the zealot, two disciples whose titles reveal their worldview and their ideologies and their identity, if Jesus could take them and make them disciples, changing who they were and let that be their chief identifier, then Jesus can do the same for us. Every last one of us who are called to walk in the way of Jesus as a disciple of Jesus. We are called to follow Jesus, not as Republican, not as Democrat, not as a conservative or centrist or a liberal, but as disciples who are to place spiritual values over our ideologies, who are called to value and place great emphasis on our relationships over party, and the practices of love over policy. That's the hard but necessary work required of us, no matter how each of us may vote. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.